So, Mr. Mark Fewell, better known as Fewelly.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Passion Project.
Good to be here.
Dude, stoked to have you.
Yeah.
And it's taken us a couple weeks to make this happen. We've been bouncing in around. Really appreciate you taking the time to come and chat.
Yeah, no problem. Nice to be here with the best looking man in podcasting.
Are you talking about yourself? Are you
No, you.
You're a funny guy. Well, listen, so Mark, this whole thing for me is really about connecting the dots. And what's fun is I've gotten to know you over the last year. And I know a lot about bits and pieces, but every time we talk, there's something new. And we were just talking a little bit ago about opportunities coming your way, people you interact with, people that we know. And it's just super cool. And that's really the whole thing here. It's like connecting the dots. And clearly, say your name?
Fewelly, Mark Fewell.
Yeah, that's not a Texas accent, and that's not a California accent, right?
No, it's Australian, but I was born in England.
Yeah.
Emigrated with my family to Australia when I was 4. So I consider myself Australian. I still have both passports.
Living in Southern California.
Living in Southern California, yeah. My whole life.
Well, we're going to dig into your whole life. There's a whole, and that's why you're here.
Okay.
So let me just tee it up this way. And the fun part for me is always like, how do I do an introduction on somebody as diverse and not eclectic in a rad way. You've done so many things, and as I was saying, like every time we talk, there's something new, and we had a chance to spend some time together, which we'll talk about as well, out of the country. And just the stories you were telling. I just really wanted to dig in and figure it out. And again, you gave us a little caveat like, oh, I'm Australian, but I have 2 passports and I was born in England. But in parallel, there's a number of things, and they seem to really come together for you in both your career and in sports and athletics and this kind of level of passion and purpose for both of them. And I call this the Passion Project. And if anybody was to look up Mark Fewell, you'll find words like passion and all these. We speak the same language, but with a very different background and a very diverse way of looking at things. So it's just really cool for me to talk to somebody that I really look up to that has a very similar view of the world, but a very different way, maybe a very different lens or a very different path in what brought you here. So here we are.
Yeah, it's awesome. My answer to that is I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up.
I kind of figured that's where you're going to go. In fact, I have that way further down the road. So on top of being an Australian living in America, and we talked a bit about super diverse business background, educational background. We're going to dig into all this. Coffee snob or connoisseur, depending on how you want to look at it.
If you use Australian vernacular.
Here we go. Big surf turkey and a big background in the surf world. There's just a ton that we're going to dig into. And I thought what we would do is let's go back to what you brought up.
Awesome.
We're going to talk about England by way of Australia. Yep. But first, do you remember how we met?
Yes.
Who introduced us?
Mark Power.
So that's 3 marks.
Yeah, 3 marks, all on one tour. And so we met through Mark, and then first time I met you, I was out, I think, running, and you and Mark were out mountain biking.
That's right.
Met at Crystal Cove.
That is right.
And then not that long after, but Mark Power said, hey, I'm doing this Piss Fit tour in Croatia. And that's where we got to spend time, which was amazing, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
We will for sure, yeah. So again, Mr. Power, who was in here in his book Piss Fit that we kind of kicked off on here. So what a fun connection. And 3 marks traveling together with not a very big group gets to be a little bit silly. So, well, listen, let's jump in. England.
Yes. Born in England, Bristol. My dad grew up in Bristol. My mum grew up outside of London in Surrey. They had met. I'm not even sure exactly how they met. I think it was at a dance, as they called it then. But they had both, especially my dad, spent time when they were younger in their 20s visiting Australia. And back then, I mean, it was a journey. It's not like go up to LAX, jump on a plane, you can be there in 13 hours. It was travel by ship and stuff like that. So my dad did that quite a few times. So I think that in my dad's my dad was a big adventurer, and when you do a lot of work, as I have, because I'm really curious about development, self-development, other people's development, when you do a lot of work on your values and motivations, you kind of realise that inevitably some of this comes from your parents. And so my dad was a big adventurer, sailed halfway around the world on a 70-foot ketch when he was young, was going to places like Tahiti and Fiji when people hadn't really even heard about it. He was.
Was he a surfer?
He was a lot of things. Maybe not dissimilar to me. Never really thought about it, but he was British Army running champion, and he was a physical training instructor for the Scots Guards, which are the Queen's Guards. He was a motorcycle rider. He was a motorcycle racer. He played motorcycle soccer, which is the dumbest sport you can ever imagine, resulting in multiple broken bones. And so he had this adventurous spirit. My mother clearly had it. And so it probably was inevitable that we would emigrate, but we emigrated as a family. So my sister at the time was 2, I was 4, and then we added I didn't. They added a couple more to the family when we got there, and we landed in Northern Beaches of Sydney, which funnily enough, after a lot of travelling around Australia and lots of different schools and things like that, we ended up back on the Northern Beaches, which I still consider home, even though I've been here 20 years.
Which town in particular?
Manly Beach.
Some good surf there.
Yeah, best spot on it. Yeah, I was there about a week ago and scored it for a week, which was fantastic. And always good to get back there.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
And it's, from my experience there, which was quite a while ago, there are some similarities between coastal Orange County, San Diego, and coastal Sydney. It's probably catching up now, but at the time it felt like 30 years ago, like Southern California to Northern Beaches. But I think we have talked about the cost of real estate and where you grew up, like, had I only kept that one. But like, it seems like it's catching up in a lot of ways to here. It's more maybe congruent as opposed to a big disparity.
Yeah, I think the big difference is really population, and one of the reasons it ended up here is my godmother's here and got really close with her sons who are a similar age to me, and so I started coming here when I was 18, and it felt very similar to home but different, and so in many respects, the coffee's got better here over the years. When I first got here, it was like I had to fly to San Francisco to find a decent coffee, but they are very, very similar. I think the difference is population size. I do still feel that Manly in particular, and maybe a lot of the Northern Beaches, there's more community. You don't need a car. And so the sort of Southern Californian thing about driving everywhere, I think makes that sense of community a little bit harder. But certain places, down in Dana Point, Bear Coast Coffee down there, I can go down there and there'll be a bunch of expats hanging around. So it's definitely changing both ways, but they're very, very similar.
Got it. Interesting. I loved my time down there. We could talk about that on a whole nother. So what was growing up in Australia like? Northern Beaches, adventurous parents.
It was. I look back. Definitely with, I think, a sense of romance. I don't know that it was all that, but I look back with a sense of romance and a little bit of concern for my son, who's 8, my son Max, because I fear that he's growing up in sort of affluent area, very, very comfortable lifestyle, incredible school, gets driven to school every day. My childhood was... And again, I look back and go, it was formative for me. We were maybe 2 years on the Northern Beaches, but then very quickly my dad joined a company called Aberganos, and it was one of the leading companies in earth moving and mining and things like that. So Dad tended to be often forward scout to go and set up new projects or different things, and so I went to, I think, 10 schools in 6 years. I lived in the middle of the desert. I lived in areas that were predominantly Aboriginal population. I went to single classroom schools. And so, and some of these places were shitholes. Like some of these places I want to go back. I actually want to go back and write how I remember them, and then go back and
Because these were primarily mining.
mining.
Areas, right? Or,
Some of them were roads. Some of it was building a new road through it.
so you might be in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. Sapphire mines, copper mines, iron ore mines, and I joke, but at the age of 6, most kids are playing with Tonka toys or Lego trucks. I was driving heavy equipment. We lived on the first site we went to. We lived on the site in a 25-foot caravan. Three of us at that time, 3 kids. And at the end of the day, everyone would leave. Dad would throw me the keys. Bulldozers, scrapers.
How old?
Front end 6. Can't imagine anybody being
So
allowed to
cool.
do that anymore. So I was that was my life. I was, going through tailings looking for sapphires.
It set you up perfectly to drive a Tesla now, right?
Yeah. Oh my God. So yeah. But I look back and it made me adaptable, because I was having to meet and connect new people, and it's very, very subconscious. I didn't do it intentionally. And even some places where there wasn't a school for me to go to, I would connect with an adult in the area, and so one of my values is connection. You mentioned connection as well, connection of ideas, connection of people, connection of industries. It's always kind of been my thing. So that clearly came from that, and so I don't know if I would want to do it if I'd known better, but I was a kid. And to me, this was the life I was leading. But it definitely contributed to my ability, particularly in startups or problem solving, or I love things where there's no clear path. Like in my career, it's often been about, I fall into somewhere where it's like an idea, or we're trying to do this thing, or we're trying to get this sport, to the Olympics or whatever it might be. I always find myself in those intersections of change or growth, or how the hell do we figure this out? And I love that, even though it can be frustrating.
Super neat, and I'm sure that'll loop into all of the paths that you've taken, or the paths that have got you here. We could have a whole nother dialogue about, with our young kids and how kids are growing up, especially here, as you talked about, and, driving, tractors at 6 years old. I mean, it's amazing. You think about all the stuff we talk about get out and move, and get off your phones, and get out in nature, and grit. And, it sounds like you grew up that way. And you talked about your parents and your dad, and we'll talk more about some of his adventuring that you guys have done together, which is amazing. But what was school like? You're in a bunch of different schools, and we don't need to spend a lot of time there, but what was that educational time in your life? Were you doing sports at the time, or were you really focused on school? Or?
It's really interesting. So I guess I've always been active, and obviously that comes from my genes. Even as my dad became more deliberately inactive, he still played different sports: squash, tennis, running. He stopped running, fairly early in my development. I think the first time I beat him around the block is probably when he gave up. But my mum was pretty athletic, so genetically, I was disposed to that, and little athletics was the thing. But not everywhere I went had any developed sporting programs. So the one really strong memory I have is riding it was just a dragster back in the day. Malvern Star probably had the...
Is this a bike?
A bike, yeah.
Okay.
But probably had the sissy bar on the back, and I would just jump on that thing and I would just go explore. And this was back in the day when parents would let just be back, before it's dark kind of thing. And so I do have a lot of memories of doing that. I have memories of getting lost out in the desert, kind of roaming around. My friends I've travelled with will say, "Oh, Fewelly's gone walkabout again." There'll be times where I'll just break from the group and I'll just go explore.
There's so many similarities between you're talking about, and maybe this is the nature of people that are into endurance sports or really pushing it, because I've told the story even here. I used to get on my bike, when I was in elementary or middle school and just take off 4:30 in the morning and just go. You know, and it was, as you said, you were able to do that back then. It wasn't a threat. There wasn't we would never let Reef or Max probably go out and do those things now, unfortunately, but it was awesome. And that's how I think we could have a whole conversation about the value and the benefit of growing up with some freedoms and getting out and go get hurt and bang your knee and break your jaw, as I did on my bike one day. That wired shut for a month. That was super fun.
That's fun.
But there is a power in that, and I think the educational impact on your life and your desire and your ability and I would imagine your confidence in just going on walkabout. Hey, we're going to be traveling wherever. I'm just going to go get lost.
Yeah. There was definitely there were a lot of places where there was no, you know, sometimes there was barely any schooling, and so in that situation, for whatever reason, I loved doing like math when I was young, and I loved to read and I loved to write, and so I would do those things of my own volition, you know, to fill time. So even if I wasn't there were times where I wasn't even in a school, but I would find ways to do that, and I'd find ways to be creative myself.
It's interesting how those things have stayed with you, because in things that you've done, and which we'll talk about shortly, like you've been very much of a self-starter, and you're looking, as you said, looking for things that didn't have a clear path. And I would imagine all that time by yourself, that creative mind, that, you know, having the math skills certainly is a bonus, but the reading and the writing, again, all those things go together with so the athletics and your desire to go out and do stuff, and your ability and desire to go do school stuff. Like a lot of kids don't want to do either one these days. They just want to play Minecraft, right?
Which there's value in that too, you know.
Sure.
But I think I was intellectually confident at a young age. I was a very late developer, very late, and I was always the smallest kid in school, or one of the smallest kids. So I didn't get to this height till I was 27. At 18, I was 5 foot tall. Wow. And I remember that because my surfboard was 5'1". Wow. And so physically, I never really had the confidence, but intellectually, I was always, I think it comes down to curiosity. I would always have knowledge that I could share. Not saying it was always right, but I was always confident that I had knowledge to share, and I enjoyed doing that. I did find, I learned young that football wasn't for me. You know, I had decent speed, but I wasn't big enough. But I did find through little athletics that distance running, I had capability, and obviously that came from my dad's genes. And then I didn't really develop it until probably the last 2 years of school, when I would run the sort of 5K school races, and I would do okay at that. But it was really in my late 20s when I got into triathlon that I developed that side of it. So little athletics helped, but then surfing was the one thing that I became decent at surfing.
So when did you move back to the coast and start surfing?
I was 10. So 10. I was 10 years old.
Did you stay there at that point, or were you still mobile?
No. So once we moved back there, and then my parents bought a delicatessen in Manly, literally across the street from Manly Primary School, which I still love it when I walk by there. And I started working in the shop as well. So I started working at the age of 10. So that was sort of then, okay, that was the start of Manly. And I probably didn't get any good at surfing. Surfing lessons were not like they are now. Like the surf schools now are so good. The equipment is so good to learn on. I think it probably took me 3 or 4 years to stand up. But by my 14, 15, and when surfing started to come into school programs, I was okay. And then I did decently in surfing competitions at the club level, and then sometimes at the state level, and then at the university level.
So at that time, was it really just surf? Was that your primary focus?
Yeah, surf, squash, and martial arts.
Oh, I didn't know about the martial arts.
Yeah. Well, I don't think about it much anymore because I've lost all the skills because I haven't done it for a long time.
Gotcha. Yeah. Got it. Okay, so let's keep going about school. High school. You were there in Manly.
Yeah, high school Manly. Went to Christian Brothers up on top of the hill, which was interesting because at that time I considered myself an atheist. So going to a Catholic boys' school was an interesting thing, and I think in part that might be why when I started to skip religion, maybe the teachers didn't mind so much. So literally it was at the top of the hill, and you could see the harbour from the classroom, and if there was a swell running, you could tell because there was a Dobroyd point, the swell would get in there, and so you'd know if there were any waves, and it was literally I could run to my house down the hill, probably within about 2 minutes, grab my board and be at the surf in about 4 or 5 minutes. So there was occasion when I would skip out at recess and come back after lunch and get in a surf. And
that's good
I
living.
like to think nobody knew, but I actually think that maybe they didn't like a smart-ass disruptive person in their religion class.
The nemesis had left the building.
Yeah.
Oh, Fewelly's not here. Got it. So let's jump. University comes. So you're surfing and martial arts and squash. It sounded like you were getting better and better at surf. Were you fully into it at that point?
Yeah,
or?
So I think in my about 16, 17, I was doing it a lot. I was in Queenscliff Board Riders Club. Actually, I started in Midstane Board Riders, and that was sort of the start of club competition. And I was known, the reason. So one of the things in my career, you mentioned before, I've done a lot of things. In Australia, we'll say, well, I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. It's also true little bit true in my sporting career. That led me down the path of wanting to work in the business of sport. I was never good enough to be a pro in any of the things, but I was decent in a whole bunch of things. My failure in surfing was not my skill. It was I didn't grow up swimming until later when I got to Manly, and I didn't develop the confidence for big surf. And so without that, I was never going to be a pro surfer. I've beaten some pro surfers, in various times, but
You want to share some names?
No, I won't do that. But I surfed alongside a lot as well. And so, for example, there were a number of times if it was, it was coming down to a final and the surf was small, then inevitably it would be like me and Barton Lynch would be put into the team.
That's some good company.
Yeah. I've been super fortunate to get to hang out and I worked for Barton as a lawyer as well, and I've worked with Barton as a co-commentator in a bunch of surf events.
You're doing me a great service. What everybody just heard is that you have a commentating background and a legal background, so you're a professional talker. And you've teed it up for later because we'll be talking about that. But for anybody that doesn't surf, Barton Lynch also is recently called the Stoke Bloke, but he was, I think, like the 1989 world champion. He's this incredible personality, but he was a Manly kid, right?
Yeah, it was Manly, but we had the Northern Beaches and the Manly area in particular had an unfair proportion of sporting stars. So Surf Ironman, Guy Leach is part of that.
This is the lifeguard Ironman.
This is the lifeguard Ironman,
which is incredible in Australia.
But then also in the triathlon space, you had a bunch of pros that were from there or came from there. Greg Bennett, who's from Mossman. Actually, Barton's from Mossman, but he spent most of his time in Manly.
The area you're talking about is probably the 80s-ish.
Yeah,
right?
definitely the 80s.
And that's about the time.
80s into the 90s.
Yeah, and that's around the time that triathlon was really starting to pick up steam.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So you were there kind of the formative front edge.
I wasn't there early. I had friends. I remember one of my friends at school, so I would have been 17. His name was Alan Sims, and he was a good surfer too. He was a very good surfer, and he got into this thing called triathlon. I went, well, what the hell's that? But there's a guy called Mark Dragon who was Australia's, I think, first official Australian champion, and then went on to win a whole bunch of stuff, and then was also formative in the professionalism of triathlon, which I was involved on the legal side and the commentary side with him. But there was literally, you name the sport, there was Olympic gold medalists from that. It was swimming, it was water polo, it was surfing. You know, Robbie Bain, Barton Lynch, you know, Midget Farrelly. You know, obviously.
And if you surf, these are names that are pretty well known.
Yeah, so they were all around. You know, Pam Burridge,
Gotcha.
Lane Beachley, who's a dear friend of mine who, you know, I got to grow up, sort of, she's younger than me, but, you know, grow up with her as she went into her.
So let me ask you this. This leads us in. So real quickly, talk about university, because clearly you kept going in school because you're a lawyer,
Well,
et cetera.
I didn't.
So you didn't?
So when I was, it's called doing your HSC, and in Australia the system's a little bit different, or it was then, it's probably still the same, is that what you got into is 100% dependent on the mark that you get in what was called the high school certificate then, or leaving, they call them the A levels in England. So that dictated what you could go and do.
Wow.
I didn't know what I wanted to do. All I knew is that I wanted to surf. And so I didn't study, I messed around. I was in England for 3 or 4 months with my mother one time, which sort of put me a little bit behind that I never caught up on. So I passed. My goal was to pass. I passed by 2 points. And I decided that I wanted to, after I finished, I'd saved up, I'd worked two or three jobs continuously during my last 2 years of school, and I'd saved up and I took off travelling for 4 months. Went to Europe skiing, came here to the States, and mountain biking and surfing. And
Australians are great at doing that. Americans aren't as good. I did. I was fortunate enough to do it, but I actually went to Northern Beaches and I bought a old Holden wagon.
Yeah, you did it
and
well.
I camped and surfed for 2 months up the coast. It was fantastic.
You did it really well.
It was good, but not a lot. You always see Australians, Germans, and Canadians traveling the world. You don't see as many Americans.
Yeah, and Scandinavians as well. They're really good travellers too. So I travelled, and then I went, I love travelling. I'm going to be a travel agent. And so I went and got my travel agent certificate, and I went and got a job in travel.
I have to press pause for a second here because you have more certificates. Like if I was just doing a little, like I don't want to know too much because I want to dig and understand, but you have a lot and you're working on one right now, which is super impressive. So, okay, you get your travel.
Yeah, I get a job in travel, and then it's probably about 18 months in, I realise, the promise of all this travel isn't there. And then, you know, some good friends of mine, some smart friends of mine were like, hey, you know, it was really them. They were saying, you could do whatever you want, or you could do a lot more, you know, and through conversation, it wasn't through convincing. I'm like, you know what, I should go back to university. And originally I was going to do economics. I wanted to be a stockbroker. And then a strange course of events and some influence with some close friends led me into, I want to go to law. The careers or the vocational guide so I had to go back and resit what was the HSC, and there's a really great program called TAFE in Australia, and so you can go and do courses that it's public education, but it's outside the normal school system, and all different types of training. And so I went back to do it, and the vocational guide said no one ever gets enough points to do that. So I'm like, fuck you.
And you did.
And I did, and I got into law, and so I did my law degree part time though, so I could surf more. And I could actually work as well in some law firms of a friend of mine.
See, that's pretty smart because most people that want to work and surf work at a restaurant, and during the day they surf, and they work restaurant at night. You're like, well, I'm aiming a little higher. So what was the allure of law? And then where did you go with it?
Okay, so happenstance. So the whole reason it first came up was I was in a car accident. And a good friend of mine, Wally Meeks, who's still practicing today, got me and my friend who were in the car, and it did, you know, the injuries I would say were minor, but certainly disruptive. And at that time, they were getting good settlement. And he he got me enough money that independently paid my way through the rest of college. Now, Australia's a very different system there, so I think my entire law degree cost me $2,000 plus the books.
Wow.
But then it also gave me the opportunity to travel with friends through the whole thing. So while I was there, I did my honours thesis in advanced environmental dispute resolution. But I was really interested in sports law because I've got all these professional friends, surfers, triathletes, snowboarders, skateboarders, motocross, whatever it is. And but there wasn't really a practice of sports law in Australia. It wasn't recognised. It certainly wasn't recognised in universities. So I started to look, and I came to some conferences, paid my own way to some conferences over here, and I found the few, kind of older, wiser men and women, and also the young bucks. There was kind of a group of us who really wanted to work in that space. And so I developed a commercial law, so I was commercial and property law, but then with a sports, entertainment, marketing and IP specialty. And I represented different world champions, I represented modelling agencies and promotional agencies, and all of the huge ecosystem around sport.
You got to play in the
in
space you wanted to play in.
Yeah, in all of that. And
cool.
And also, from the age of 16, I was writing. And so I was writing for the Manly Daily, the local rag, which unfortunately no longer exists. And so I'd have a weekly column on surfing. Later on, that became about triathlon, and then I branched into different parts of media. But so I was just trying to find, in a world where I was not going to be good enough to be a professional athlete or a professional entertainer, how could I work with my friends, basically?
Well, it's so interesting if you step back, or just me kind of picking up on it. So you picked a profession that you could then focus on working with or working in those industries or with those people that you really love. You're like, I love surfing and the environment and triathletes. I'm going to go into a profession. There's not many that could touch all of them. Law can.
Yeah. Tax could, but didn't want to do that.
No, I don't want to do that either. No, that's super interesting. You got to go do that. And then just because it's super interesting and it's relevant, we talked about certificates and you have 87 of them. And you talked just now, you mentioned environmental.
Yeah.
Share what the certificate program you are doing right now and who it's with.
Yeah. So I've just spent the last 13 months in a executive program at MIT.
This little place
called MIT. And it's a Chief Sustainability Officer program, and doing that with a view to increasing my impact as a leader, and just my knowledge as well. And it's been super interesting because I did advanced environmental law as a lawyer. I kind of used my knowledge then for evil because I love property development, but I never really used it fully. But I realised that in the whole ESG thing, and ESG is a very tricky term right now, but the fundamental principle of environmental work and social work and governance, obviously as a lawyer, and I was on a lot of international sporting organisations, local and regional. So I've done a lot of governance. I just felt like this was a good thing to round out. And it's been super interesting. I've learned a heap. I've learned that there's a lot of really, really smart people in the space. There's a lot of parts of this space that is super important and super critical, but I'm never going to be the one doing the life cycle assessment. There's much, much smarter people who have done environmental science and stuff, but I know enough, again, jack of all trades, I know enough to be dangerous across the entire spectrum of meaningful work that any corporation or any business or private foundation wants to do. So that's why I've been doing that.
And we're going to go back because we haven't finished all the way with surf and with sport.
Yeah.
But it seems like you have this determination or passion to not just learn something, but you want to go all the way in. So you get certified. You don't just go like scratch the surface. You're like, I'm going to go do a 13-month course at MIT because I want to figure this out.
Yeah.
Right? I want to, like, is that been a thread through your life?
Yeah. So my key values are curiosity, love of learning, vision. So one of the things
These are your own personal core values.
Yeah, these are my core values. So helping other people with their vision, which obviously goes into business, and connection and collaboration. They're sort of my core values. So curiosity has clearly been there from the start. It's both a curse and a blessing. Oh, creativity is one I forgot, and I think curiosity and creativity go hand in hand. And so, yeah, I've always... The challenge these days is AI and the wealth of on the internet, and a little bit of a point of what I think of as a lesson for young people coming up. Back when I was starting my career, there was no LinkedIn. There was barely internet.
Right.
The search engines certainly didn't work. And so I had to go and research and ask other wise people and go, who are the experts in this space? Now you can do it through LinkedIn,
right,
through everything else, but the principle is still the same. And I think the important principle is that those who have achieved or done things in a space, who, whether they're seen as the experts or they're seen as journey people in the space, they are always happy to help the next generation, kind of coming through. And so, that's where things haven't changed. I think it's just a lot easier now to find the right people, to connect to. But now, these days, though, the tools for research and connection are far superior. But you can go down a deep hole. But there's so much more knowledge.
Sure.
That's the other thing.
But the thing that strikes me, and listen, I don't know a lot of people that have their own set of core values. Core values are something we put together for businesses, for organizations, nonprofits, whatever. It's a guiding light. It's the North Star, and it's your framework, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know many people that go, oh no, my own personal core values. Like, I love that. I just don't know many people that have gone down that path. But I think it reinforces. Again, I was reading your bio, and I think in there you use the word passion 3 times. I'm like, of course Fewelly's going to be here. Like, we're speaking the same language, but I would say that you're very far down that path, and you do it in a way that I don't know many people that have embedded all of this into daily life.
Well, it's been a lot of work, and I guess part of it is it comes down to my curiosity and my love of not just personal development, but developing other people. Like the greatest successes I've had in any business is the people I've got to work with, especially where I've got to work with young people and develop them, and now they are leaders in whatever they're doing. Like that's the greatest thing. The interesting thing about understanding yourself is the first module in this MIT program that was about 3 months was innovation, but 80% of that program was about understanding yourself. The MIT philosophy is that you cannot be a good leader, especially in innovation, if you don't understand yourself. And
do you agree with that?
I think if I think about good leaders, I think a good leader knows themselves enough and knows their weaknesses enough and knows how to bring the best out in others. And innovation really is a collaborative, creative effort, unless you're a random inventor, but then you still need people to bring it to market. So I think it's a super interesting philosophy. It's also based on strengths, so Strengths Finder and stuff like that. It's like what are your strengths? You cultivate those, you work on those, and don't try to be what you're not. Like don't give me you can give me an Excel spreadsheet, but fill it in first. I can run a budget. But don't ask me to build one.
So your skill set, would you say that I don't want to put words in your mouth, but would you say that your superpower I would say in business, but it's, I think probably in business and in life is your ability to, whether it be inspire or motivate or lead or engage.
It's vision. And I've had others help me get to that, and the creativity part comes in it, and the communication and connection part obviously comes in it. But I am most alive, and I have had the most positive feedback from when I'm helping get people to set the vision, because that can be hard. So both create a vision and then roll that vision out, and then get people on board to go and, as a group, go after that.
Got it. Well, we're going to keep going down this path.
Yeah.
We'll come back.
Okay.
I really want to hear about how you got into the role in the surf world that you did, where you were a commentator and all this.
Yeah.
Clearly, you're a good speaker. And what's funny is, if you don't know Fewelly, he's got his own podcast. So I'm and he's a commentator and he's an attorney. So I've got him on the wrong side of the table. Typically, it's him asking the questions and speaking the most. But we'll get back. I really want to know, because I'm just curious about the commentating and engagement.
Sure. Yeah.
But I also want to know now, you were talking about leadership and all this, but you've got both a lot of leadership roles in the sports world and in the business world.
Yeah.
Did they happen concurrently? Was it by design, or did you just fall? Let's talk about when you start, maybe after your pure legal degree, what started happening that took you all these different directions?
It's a really good question, and I'd like to say it was all a grand plan, but I think it's more luck by being in the right place at the right time and knowing the right people. So the sport thing, there was a pivotal moment for me that I wrote about a long time ago, and it might have been the 1978 Coca-Cola Surfabout, which was at Manly Beach, although being from Queenscliff, I should say it was actually Queenscliff, and it was Larry Blair won that event. So I was a Grom, so what would I have been, 12, 13 or 14? But I went to this event. They were actually covering it on national television, which back then there's only 4 stations in Australia, so it was a big deal. Wide World of Sports was covering it, and so it was a big deal, and it was at my home beach, and I would go up there every day, and every day I would meet these pro surfers. One I had known before, and it's interesting because later on, actually with a bunch of these people, I've worked with them much, much later. So there's a guy called Mark Warren, who was one of the bronzed Aussies, along with Pete Townend, who's here, and Ian Kent's Kanga. So Mark Warren I had seen around because he was from Narrabeen, and had met him through, I think he was dating the sister of one of the guys I knew at some point in time. So I knew him already, but I remember sitting talking with Jerry Lopez. I remember Reno Abalira sharing cookies with me on a wall. So
you were in the middle of it all.
I was in the middle of it as a fan, as a Grom, and that event experience somehow stuck with me about sport as entertainment and events. So I love events, love running events, love going to them. So, and this has come through my career. So that was the sort of pivotal moment that was like, wow, at that stage, maybe I didn't think I could be a pro surfer, but there was something in that experience. And so when I was all the board riders clubs I was in, all of the triathlon clubs I was in, I would invariably end up on their committees and boards. I would end up writing their newsletters. I would end up, writing in the local rag. And when I became a lawyer, that expanded out. I became, the first thing I was legal advisor to Triathlon New South Wales. I did some work with Netball Australia. And then as that built up, and then I was on the board of Triathlon Australia, then I got asked to be head of the Constitutional Committee for the International Triathlon Union, which is the governing body that, while I was there, took the sport to the Olympic Games. Wow. And so it was partly passion and willingness as a young professional to go, I'll dedicate, and it's time, it's travel, it's effort, and none of this is paid. Some could call it networking, but you've got to be really want to do it. You got to want to be of service, and it was just I'd put my hand up. I'd be interested. I'd put my hand up, and for whatever reason, people believed that I could add value, whether I could or not. they thought I could.
Sounds like you have been for a while now.
I try. It not always, but I think that's the other thing, that whether it be in sort of personal life or in professional life, is it's that notion of being of value. That's really important to me. If I can't do something, if I don't think I can be of value, I'm always happy to chat to anybody about anything. But I'll be the first to say, I don't think I can provide any value there.
And yet you went to work for some really big, notable brands. You want to talk about some of the companies
Sure.
you worked for?
Yeah. Well, as a lawyer, I mean, I was the IP lawyer for F1 racing in Australia.
Oh, fun.
I was one of the most fun jobs as a lawyer I ever did. I was on the brand protection team at Melbourne F1, and we were literally seizing giant semi-trailers full of counterfeit material and seizing it and deporting these English backpackers who were selling it. Like, it was super fun, right in the middle of it all. But Procter and Gamble was a client of mine, so I used to do a lot of their work. Lots and lots of sporting organisations, and then after that, I kind of moved into the businesses themselves. I always knew as a lawyer, I loved my client base. I loved aspects of the practice of law, but I hated billing. I just hated it, and it was remarkable. The first day that I didn't have to fill a timesheet, I felt so free and creative.
Well, what was that? I mean, because at some point you moved here, and some of these other big pieces of your career happened in the US, right?
Yeah. So I again, through connections, I met a guy called Peter Adderton, who was the brainchild behind Boost Mobile, which was the first youth-focused telecommunications company. It was before Virgin, it was before anybody. And he had this vision for a very, authentic brand, and he wanted it to be rooted in the things that were very Australian: action sports, music, art, all those things. And that was all my beat on the professional side. So I joined him as sort of the first shareholder employee.
Wow.
And there were a couple of other shareholders at that time. And that was the start of that. And we launched 3 countries in 3 years under different models. And, event launches, and it was super, super fun. So, and we sold it here early, but I stayed on, and it just became a unicorn business.
Yeah.
Billions of
Were you
of
the
dollars.
one responsible for getting them involved in supporting surf contests?
I was the one who negotiated it all. I was certainly, I knew all the players, so it was a very easy thing to do. And that was basically my event for the next 8 years down at Trestles.
Oh, okay.
And even though I very quickly stopped doing legal work, I would still do all of our sports related stuff. We had 150 action sports athletes, some of the biggest names in the world. One year we held the 3 richest events in surf, skate and snow. And so I had a great team, and I've got to lead a lot of really great things. And then also partnerships was my thing. So go and do a deal with Quicksilver or Billabong or Ruka or whatever it might be. But then I got to build amazing teams, with amazing people who could do things better than me.
Is that when you were commentating surf?
So I was already commentating. Before that, I had already done 10 years of television and event commentary for triathlon.
Oh, wow.
And I'd done, some local surf stuff. But when we started to run our own surf contests, especially World Tour events, it was just natural that, because I like doing it, and also because the one thing that I've always liked to do again with the creative side of me is looking at things and going, well, what's been done before, what's been done in other areas. And so because I'd been involved in the Olympic Games, I was one of the opening commentators for the Sydney Olympic Games. Actually, the first opening commentator.
How was that? Staggering.
Unbelievable. One of the best times of my life.
What year was that?
2000. So I did triathlon, 2 triathlon events, and then 2 men and women mountain biking, cross-country mountain biking.
Wow.
And I got to work with people like Phil Liggett and Peter Graves and these Americans.
Phil Liggett's the one that does the Tour de France. He's such a
legend.
recognizable...
More than 50 years he's been doing
Is that right?
that. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So I'd already been doing that, so it was natural. And so when I looked at what was happening in surf, there were 2 things that happened. One was, especially over time, because we were a non-endemic sponsor, I always worked hard at accepting that, but then how can we level up the game? And so coming from my Olympic experience, I'm like, how can we do the broadcast better? Live streaming and surfing was a leader in live streaming of sport. It was one very early in, but how could we change it? How could we level it up? Which costs more money. And so, we would spend $1 million on the broadcast. We bring in an outside broadcast truck that had never been done before, that had previously been at the X Games and stuff like that. So it became natural that I would lead those efforts, and then it was just like, okay, well, I'll just put myself in rotation. That way, at least, all the sponsor mentions would be done.
Got it.
But it was fun.
So if you did, so this is a piece I missed, and I know I'm all over the place, but
That's all right.
but so was your
My
life was
career
all
is,
over,
yeah.
which is radical.
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
cool how it's all kind of intermixed. But when did the triathlon and these alternative non-surf sports become a real passion or a focus for you?
Yeah. So when I graduated, so surfing became a passion, in my early teens, and it's never gone away. Never gone away. Like
Yeah,
I
you're
surfed,
still full surf turkey, we know.
Yeah, I was back in Australia for 6 days. I surfed 12 times in Manly Court.
Hallelujah.
Like, it was epic.
Good for you.
So that's never gone away. Triathlon happened. I obviously knew people who were in the sport, but I graduated. I'm going to date myself here, but I finished my law degree, and then I got my practicing certificate in '91. And that was a recession in Australia. So I came straight out, all ready to go. Couldn't find a job, and I'm like, okay, so I was like pounding the streets. It's funny, the probably the first job I went for, I ended up getting it, but it took like 5 months, and I think I just wore them down. I was just annoying, but for whatever reason, I decided that, okay, I need a challenge. I need a challenge to keep me that's just what I felt. And I looked around and I went, triathlon. Now, I was not a great swimmer. I was a surfer. I didn't grow up early on the beach.
They're not the same. Similar,
they're
not
not
the
same. And so I'm like, I was a good runner. I other than riding around on my dragster, I hadn't ridden a bike. In fact, the bikes with the skinny tires scared the crap out of me. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do that. And within, I think 3 months, I signed up for an event, and I think I ran in Reebok high tops, and I wore headphones with a Walkman, Sony Walkman.
I recall
for
this
the music. And took me, 30 minutes to do the swim. The leaders are coming out in like 18. The bike, I would think I was like 5th last. But the run, I made up all these things. I'm like, this is awesome. So I got the bug, and then I probably did like 100 races in the next 2 years.
So you went deep.
I went deep, and at the same time as professionally, I kind of got into it. And there were some amazing people in Warringah Triathlon Club and in Cronulla Triathlon Club, and Balmoral, who were just, especially the Cronulla guys that had been around in the sport since the beginning, were so encouraging. And then I developed, kind of a new network of sort of friends, and I just got into it. I just got so into it. And next thing I know, I'm traveling the country and then the world. So I think...
Traveling world racing?
Yeah, racing as an amateur. But I represented Australia, I think, for the first time in 93, I think it was, in Manchester, and then I represented a couple more times. But as I moved more deeper into the media side, I was still racing, but I chose to. I just loved
Pivoted.
I loved the media stuff. So so I went deep. So it really was only leaving there and coming here to do a startup that ended up being a rocket ship. With
Was that Boost?
Boost, yeah, with all of the distractions and all of the hard work that comes with any startup. And it's funny, I held my fitness for a while. I represented Australia again in 2007 in duathlon up in Newfoundland, the pouring rain. And I'd held my kind of fitness through that whole thing. I was just a couple more age groups up. But so I was all in. Now, part of it was the challenge, part of it was the confidence it gave me, part of it was the relevance it had to all of the other things I was doing, but I just loved it. I have just bought a new bike to get back into it after a long time, but
and you haven't stopped.
awesome.
I mean, this goes back to our trip that we spent together,
Yeah.
which was, primarily mountain biking, a fair bit of trekking around and stuff. And I
Yeah.
mean, we were hanging together a fair bit during that, but
Yeah.
you haven't stopped.
No, I just stopped the discipline of training though. Like I used to train anywhere from, and there were periods where my career's also been, every so often I take time out. Like I've just done, I take time out to learn something, or I take time out to go do something else. I took time out to go be a journalist, going to surf events around the world doing for the ISA for a while. I've done that every 5 years or so. And so there was a period of time where I was working as a commentator, I was part-time working as a lawyer, and I was training my ass off trying to get as good as I could. And a lot of the time I was training with the pros, and I wasn't as good as them, but I could be a few minutes back.
I'm guessing this is pre-marriage, and it's definitely pre-child.
Yes. Like you, especially when you have a kid, you realize like, oh my God, I really did take that free time for granted. Yeah, but I had a good half decade of it.
And it sounds like you
it's okay.
You used it pretty well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that use that time free for a whole different direction.
Yeah.
So I commend you.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. And I know that I need to do more now. I need to work at it harder. But I'm also very grateful for the genetics that I was given that allow me to,
Well, let's talk
maintain.
genetics for a second. And again, I'm going to say it again. I know that we're bouncing.
Yeah.
But you talk genetics, and you mentioned your dad being an
Yeah.
adventurer.
Yeah.
Tell us about your dad and some of the adventures you guys have had, because this is unbelievable.
Okay. Yeah. So my dad was a lot of things, but very physical. He was he's probably a bad boy. You'd probably call him a bad boy. Like he liked a good stoush, as they would say. Obviously being in the army is part of that. But a raconteur, great sense of humour, and but he loved motorbikes. And when we were in England, and I've still got some memories of us going to, when I was definitely under 6, it might have been under 4, going to motorcycle races where he was competing. And so he was always into them, and he had scramblers, he had 2 road bikes. When we left, just as an aside, when we left England, he had 6 bikes. 6, and he sold all of them for £100. There's one of them now that's worth $150,000, a Vincent Black Shadow that I was actually conceived on the back of. I was conceived on my parents' honeymoon, which was a 6-week motorcycle camping tour around Europe.
Wow.
So Dad loved bikes. I've got all these incredible photos of my dad, both in military attire and casually and racing and doing all these crazy things that he did. And he always had a bike, even when we were travelling around Australia and when we came back, but he gave it up. He had an accident. I think the last big accident was when he was playing motorcycle soccer. It broke his leg in 2
Never
places.
heard of such a thing.
Yeah,
I can picture it's like polo.
It's a big, it's like polo. It's a bigger ball though. Think of a soccer ball, but it's bigger, right? And it's a little bit squishier, but it's a big ball. And I was talking to him about it recently, so this is how I remember it. They used to do it at Sydney Showground, which is where they have like World Series cricket and all this stuff. And they were usually under lights. he was doing this, and he said the ball, and he popped a wheelie to go and kick the ball, and the front tyre landed on it, and then his leg got wedged between his bike and I think another bike, and it broke his leg in 2 places.
Ouch.
And so that's the sort of last time that I remember him really.
This sets the stage for the
riding.
kind of man you're down. One of the men.
Yeah. Well, apparently what he did is he was laying on the ground and his leg was out straight.
Ugh.
And somebody came up to him and go, you okay? He goes, I think I've broken my leg. And the guy, it looks okay to me. And he lifted up his knee, but his leg stayed on the ground.
All right, enough of that for me.
So he had a good laugh at that. So,
but it didn't stop him from riding motorbikes. I mean, you guys have. This is what I want to get to. Tell us what you've done with your dad, because it's so special and really badass.
So I'll just set the scene. So he did give it up for a long time, maybe 20, certainly 20 years, maybe 30 years. And my dad nearly died. He was in an induced coma through an infection. I think he was 70 at the time. And when he came out, and it was, I had to make the call about whether to put him into the coma or not. So it was sort of very, very heavy. But he came out, and immediately after that, we spent a lot of time. It was really interesting because my dad was always this bulletproof, like, tough dude. And afterwards, and part of it is all the drugs that they pump in you to keep you alive. He was very emotional and kind of reflective. And during those course of conversations after that, I said, why don't you take up riding again? And he went, and so he went out, bought himself, I think the first bike was a Goldwing, a 2300cc Goldwing. And from that moment, motorcycle riding, so that was, I want to say he was, say, 69 or 70. He's now 88. He's now on his, I don't know. Bikes are getting a little bit smaller, but he's now on probably his 10th or 12th bike. He's ridden ever since. He does it every week, unless it's raining. Alongside, he does Zumba twice a week, Pilates 3 times.
Those are good
all
genes.
those other things.
But tell the story.
Yeah. Anyway,
It's so good.
So Dad got back into it, and then I remember I was over here later on. And he said, I'm going to go ride the Indian Himalayas. And with a good friend of his, Tony Martin, who he used to ride with 60 years before. And not knowing anything. And I didn't grow up riding bikes. We had mini bikes maybe, but I wouldn't consider myself a rider. So I'm in my 40s. And my dad goes, I'm going to go ride the Himalayas for a month on this tour that rides across the highest roads, the highest motorable roads in the world. And I was like, how many people get to do that with their 72-year-old dad? So I rang a buddy of mine, Will Travis, who's like a global brand leader and whole other interesting guy. And I said, hey, my dad's doing this thing. I want to go. I'd like to have a roommate. You don't ride either, because he didn't ride either. Do you want to do it? So with 4 months to go, we both bought Royal Enfield motorcycles, which is what we were going to be riding over there in India. And I went and did motorcycle safety course, and then I learnt on the mean streets of Orange County riding from Dana Point to Irvine. That was my practice. And then next thing, total ignorance, we were thrust into the craziness of riding a motorcycle through India. And we did that for 6,000 miles, I think it was. We were
over how much time?
It was 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks.
That's a lot of riding.
We camped at 17,000 feet. The highest part of the road was 19,400 feet. We spent a night in Taliban country. We had everything from 600-year floods to having to spend the night in an abandoned hotel surrounded by thousands of baboons because we got flooded out. And somehow, not only did I survive, I was doing a lot of yoga at the time, Kundalini yoga, and I think it definitely got me through unscathed, through focus. But we got to Delhi. I think that out of the 20 people on the tour, 15 crashed, probably 5 of them seriously crashed out, and it was just, and I loved it. It was probably the greatest adventure of my life, and to do it with my dad and a buddy, it was fantastic.
Did Dad crash?
Dad did not crash. Us 4, none of us did. Now I think in part, it's funny. The best riders, like there was an Australian enduro champion, he had a horrific crash, like 100 kilometre an hour head on with a car. Now, it was the car's fault, but I think that, we were more cautious, we were certainly more defensive, or I was just slow. I was
when you and I
always
were
the slowest one.
There's something to be said for that. When we were riding mountain bikes in Croatia, which we were blessed to do together, we were both kind of riding off the back, because when you're off the back, you can pick your own speed.
Yeah.
And
So there was a lot of that, and we had guides. But since that time, COVID really got in the way. But every year we would do something. So cool. We did Iceland. We circumnavigated Iceland on a motorcycle. We did Vietnam, which was incredible. We did Tasmania, part of Australia, which was stunningly beautiful. We did California up to the
What
Redwoods.
was the most recent one with your dad?
With my dad, Vietnam. So that was right before COVID. Like literally right
How old,
before.
So he would have been, what, 82?
He was in his 80s.
That's incredible.
Yeah, 84 maybe, 85. And that was definitely, like a little bit harder for him, because it was, there was one day where we were like on a pothole dirt road for 8 hours up in the jungle. But he killed it. He's still a far better rider than I will probably ever be. And then with my other friends like Will and others, I've done a whole bunch of other stuff too, like Cambodia. And so again, I don't consider myself a gun rider by any means.
No, but it's another certificate that you got.
It's
right?
It's a form of exploration and discovery, and there's a challenge in it. There's a great book called Nah Country.
Yeah.
And the whole fundamental principle behind it is, as you age, you can continue to learn things and you can actually get better, but there has to be a mixture of coordination, physicality, and mental
Is that the book that takes the group of older guys like our age, my age, and teaches to get really, really good mountain biking, or really good
It's based upon the guy that wrote it, Stephen Kotler. He taught himself how to ski park, like rails and stuff like that, at the age of 50. So it's fundamentally based in that. But yeah, so the one, and there have definitely been some of those trips. There's one trip that I don't know. It's probably an achievement, but I don't know if I enjoyed it. But it was when some of us followed the Dakar Rally. And you don't do the whole course, but you go over the Andes twice, and you have like trucks doing 100 miles an hour go past you like that. Anyway, so that was scary as shit.
But radical. That's so cool.
But I've got some good photos.
I can only imagine. Well, I mean, your whole life is full of like these new things. Like you have another new thing right now.
Yeah.
You have a podcast.
Yeah.
I know I'm jumping, but like,
Yeah.
like it seems to be a theme. Like passion, purpose, and adventure. Like, let's do something new. Let's do this. Let's do that. And you have a podcast. What's it called?
It's called The Teleologist.
What is that? When I first saw that, I was like, did he make up his own words?
Yeah, it's a bit wanky. I can't decide if it's too wanky or not. So it comes from the Latin telos, which is basically the result of purpose. So it's about purposeful creativity. Who knows? I may change the title, but it's been something I've been wanting to do for years. And it had been mulled over, and people had said,
I get it. Here we are. I get it.
And then this time last year, my buddy Will Travis, he's the founder of a thing called Elevation Barn. It's basically, it attracts people who have done a lot in their lives, who have had probably a measure of success or whatever it might be, but are trying to kind of figure out what's next. It attracts a lot of creative types, and I've done it a few times before. I actually did the first one. From which it spun out, but they did one at a place called Broughton Hall in England near Manchester last year, and I went over. And part of it is like, what are you? It's a system that uncovers stuff about yourself, but also like, what are your goals, and then a system to break down those things and go after it. And one of the things that kept rising to the top was, I've been talking about this fucking podcast. Can I say that?
Yep.
For ages, and it's driven by, firstly, my love of doing media work. I just do love it. I feel very in the zone. Live TV I loved because it's on, right? Mistakes and all, you're on. So it takes me out of my head. But it's like, I love the media work. I have well over 100 close friends, and then lots of close connections that are incredible leaders in what they do in the world, that have creativity as part of it and have done some really impactful things. And it's an excuse to catch up with them and talk to. So that's where it was like, okay, this is something I need to do. I've been thinking about it for years, and it's just the technology got easier. And that was kind of one of the defining things.
Super cool. I get it. Here we are for the same reason.
Yeah.
Listen, you just said impact, which is another word that you use a lot. One of the things that we didn't touch on, but I think is important, because I think most men know about it, women would as well, but you were very, very involved with Movember, that campaign, and it's such a good one. Can you share just a quick little story about Movember?
So the Movember Foundation's the world's leading men's health charity. They've been going now since 2003, and I worked with them for over 7 years. So I've been a Mobro for about 14.
Hold on, a what?
Mobro. It's like
a Mobro
who raises money for them. And I met the one of the founders, Adam Groney. I used to be on the board of Advance LA, and we would meet all these interesting people who would come into America. Usually they'd land in LA first, and every month we would have somebody come in and talk to us about what they're doing, and then through the network, and there was some pretty impressive people on the board, very rich network, and they'll go, okay, how can we help? And he was one of those. He was here, he was living in a garage, and the three founders had sort of split themselves out across, and so got to meet Adam, and we would just catch up and talk about brand development, especially a brand that's come from Australia and then launched into other places. And then 2010 they asked me to go on the board, and then about 2 or 3 years later they said, you're kind of working for us anyway, why don't you come into a functional role and lead all of the global fundraising and marketing teams. Wow. And then, so at the time I joined, I think they'd raised about 26 million, I think. And then by the time I stepped down, they'd raised 800 million, something like that, and expanded out the programs, and they had expanded from testicular and prostate cancer into men's mental health and suicide prevention as well. It's still doing incredible work. I participate every year. I love watching what they're doing. The founders are incredible. Like the brand, somebody who will want to get on my podcast, Trav Garoni is the brand creator. And the reason why the Movember brand is so good is because he's a brand builder. Mm. He used to do a lot of work for Quicksilver and Asahi Beer, and like
got it.
A brilliant guy. So yeah, so it was just super gratifying and super fun.
Well, big kudos. What's funny is my son, his fraternity always does Movember every year. And so, yeah, I mean, it's been going for a very long time, but the numbers, when I looked it up, I was like, I mean, it's an incredible cause, and it's been incredibly impactful. Yeah. Again, I know impact is a big part of your lexicon that you like to use.
Yeah, but it's, and I'll say this about anything I've ever done, the ride I've had has been really fun and interesting. I've got to do really interesting things, but the success of those things is always down to the team that's behind it all.
Here. I mean, that's nothing. Listen, show me a team, right? I mean, we could go down that whole path. I mean, so that's why I was super happy to get in here, because we speak the same language, because I can only be here because my team is killing it at work right now, right? I mean, show me, watch the Super Bowl. Yeah. I don't care who you've got. If it's only one person, they're not going to. So everything's about team, and you got to have passion, and you have to have vision. And, what's interesting, a lot of the words you use and the statements you talk about, that it sounds like you've kind of always had. We go back to you being a kid, what we were talking about earlier. Yeah. That's what everybody's talking about right now. That's headspace. That's that determination and that passion and purpose, and it's all like the key words. Like you've this will sound cheesy, but that is who you are. Like every time we haven't known each other long, but every time you talk, like that is the language you speak in authentically all the time. Yeah,
and I've realized that it's really interesting, because I've thought about this a lot lately. It's like, what in a world of opportunity, what do I want to do? And what I've realized is that firstly, it's about purpose. So having whether it's projects through consulting or whether it's on boards or whether it's like functional roles, like that's purpose. But at the end of the day, I want to do something that matters in the world. Now, it can still be very commercial. I'm a commercial animal. I was a lawyer, you know. But I don't think I could go work for a tobacco company. It doesn't, because I fundamentally don't believe that that is good for the world. So I'm always attracted to things that are like, oh, that's a benefit, or that's, you know, that helps health. The sport health thing always ties really closely together. So that's where Movember, again, made a lot of sense. It was about men's health. And so I often find that finds its way in. Is this something that's good for somebody's health or lifestyle?
Well, it starts with headspace, and then it requires energy and output and camaraderie and good people in your court. So thank you for being one of those here with me. I think you have a big birthday coming up.
Do I have to talk about that?
No, you don't. But I will tell you that, you know, I don't know if you remember this, but we were roommates in Croatia, and you opened a card, I think, that your wife and your son had put in your bag, and it reminded you that it was your birthday.
Yes.
You had totally forgotten.
Yes, I had actually totally forgotten. I was so in the moment of the adventure.
That.
But yeah, it was fantastic, and in the Piss Fit mantra, I am actively. I've got a couple of potential ways in which to celebrate this next birthday and challenge myself. I just got to pull the trigger on which.
You're talking my language.
ones.
We can talk offline about what that might be.
Yeah, but one of them will always be. I used to always surf the number of waves of my age.
Of your age.
So I'll be doing that again.
Outstanding.
It's funny. Birthdays are a funny thing. At a certain point, you do want them to stop.
For sure.
Yeah.
However,
yes,
you have a young son.
Yes, 8.
You have a happy wife.
Hopefully.
You have you have very, very good genes, and your dad's still riding a motorcycle at 88. You've got a long road.
Yeah, I know I do.
What's what's the few, like, magic wand?
Magic wand. So I think of myself as a chimp. It's like a chief impact and marketing professional.
That's not what I thought of when you first said that.
And so, I do love, there's a lot of things that I can do, so ranging from boards to legal stuff to, I'm also a trained mediator, I'm a trained meditation teacher.
Gee, Pete.
You're
an underachiever, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, it's only to make myself feel good, I think.
Hallelujah. That's great.
But I love the connection of brand building and business growth with impact. Now that can be that impact is a small part of it, or the impact can be the whole part of it. And the Chief Sustainability Officer program is sort of another part of, I do believe that we're in a really critical part of this earth, that if we, and I know there are naysayers out there, but if we don't do better, the earth is going to be shittier for our kids. And I think science shows that's probably indisputable, but I also believe that there's a lot that can be done, and I believe that space is something every organisation, like things can't be solved and innovations can't occur unless everybody's all in. And so I do believe that there's going to be a big movement towards, it's going to move from like this notion of ESG as sort of part of what we do to, it's just a fundamental part of what everybody thinks about. Like when they think about their brand, they're thinking about what good can I do with this brand. When they think about the corporate initiatives, they're thinking about, okay, what is our role in improving the supply chain of stuff that's bad for the planet.
You know what it's going to take? It's the things that you're made of. Creativity, storytelling, commitment, impact, passion, all the things. I mean, but we're going to need leaders out there willing to do it and capable to do it, because we don't have some great leaders out there ready to do that.
It's hard. I mean, it is hard because people, every person, every business has their own stuff to deal with, right? They've got their own shit to deal with, and this requires a little bit more purposeful thinking and planning and commitment to do it. But I do think that it's it's sort of for me, there's a couple of really interesting new areas. AI is one, and I've been spending a lot of time in that space, creatively playing in there. And the other is how do organisations and businesses come into this new world where we're really thinking about what we're putting in the environment and how do we become more circular in nature.
Got it.
And still run good businesses.
Yeah, hallelujah. Well, let's do this. We're going to finish on a high note.
Okay.
Because we can talk about that and get kind of overwhelmed. Yeah. So it's the beginning of 2024.
Yep.
You have a big birthday this year.
Yep.
If we were sitting together this time next year,
yep.
What do you want to be able to look back on 2024 on this big birthday and go, I had a fucking great year. What would that look like?
Yeah. There's got to be a few big parties in there.
Okay. As long as I have an invitation.
Yeah. Well, they might not even be my own. I'm just going to like co-opt others.
Fair.
So there's that. Definitely physical challenges. So we're looking at a potential piss fit mountain bike thing in Moab. Surfing adventure, motorcycle adventure. I'd love to do something with my dad. Somewhere.
Do that.
Yeah.
Do that.
Yeah. So, and then I want to plan for my dad's 90th. I want to take him and probably my brothers and my sister, she rides to the TT races in the Isle of Man for his 90th birthday, and somehow find a way to get him a ride around the track or at least on the simulator. There's a simulator. Incredible. So I've got some like future planning, and then one of my goals, which we caught up last year, is for Max to experience the number of new countries of his age. We caught up, so he's done 7 countries, so I've got to add an 8th to that, and then interview a bunch of interesting people, and I've got a half Ironman that I've committed to for May.
Did I mention underachiever? Well, listen, let me just say this, and I'm going to end here. Thank you for being aspirational. Like what you just did, just that, most people would have 1 or 2 things. I want to run a marathon. And you're like, oh, no, I got this and this and this. Love that. Passion, purpose, impact, commitment, and a whole lot of fun. Dude, thank you so much,
Marcus. Thank you. I love what you're doing, and you inspire me as well with not just doing this, but
well, let's go have some fun. Let's get on the mountain bike and
maybe you can teach me how to ride a surf ski.
I can do that. Fewelly, thank you so much, brother. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Great to be here.